Woke critics tried to silence this farmer. Eli Turner stood on the weathered porch of his farmhouse, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd gathered in his fields. A sea of protest signs rose above the horizon, their bold letters shouting accusations. Boycott Turner Farm, protect the earth, and the most damning of all, eco-criminal. The chants were relentless, a mix of anger and self-righteous fervor. Eli's calloused hands tightened on the porch railing. The farm, passed down through 5 generations, had faced storms, droughts, and even a Great Depression, but never this. He felt the weight of his ancestors pressing on his shoulders. From the corner of his eye, he spotted June, his only child, pacing near the barn. She had come home reluctantly, torn between her life in the city and the crisis engulfing her father. Eli's voice broke through the cacophony. "I've faced worse than this," he said, though his voice trembled with doubt. Just weeks ago, Eli's life had been simple. His days began before dawn, the scent of fresh earth filling the air as he plowed fields his father once walked. His nights ended with the hum of crickets and the satisfaction of a day's hard work. He remembered the day a journalist had come to interview him. Rebecca Chase, a young reporter with a curious gleam in her eyes, had called his farm a beacon of hope for sustainable agriculture. She'd praised his hybrid farming methods, a delicate blend of tradition and innovation aimed at reviving the soil. But the optimism didn't last. Within days of Rebecca's article going viral, the storm began. Anonymous social media accounts labeled Eli a fraud, claiming his methods harmed the environment rather than healed it. What started as online criticism quickly escalated into full-blown outrage. The turning point came with a viral tweet from an influential environmental activist. Meet Eli Turner, a so-called sustainable farmer whose practices exploit our planet for profit. We demand accountability. Accompanied by a misinterpreted photo of Eli using a crop spraying machine, the tweet spread like wildfire. Eli, unaware of the digital frenzy, first learned of the backlash when the local grocery store owner refused to carry his produce. "Sorry, Eli," the man had said, not meeting his eyes. "Too much heat on your name right now." Protesters began to appear at the edge of his land. First a few, then dozens. They camped out, sang protest songs, and shouted slogans about saving the planet. At first, Eli tried to reason with them, but his words fell on deaf ears. Late one evening, Eli received a call from June. "Dad," she said, her voice taut with worry, "this is bigger than a misunderstanding. People are calling you a symbol of everything wrong with modern farming. You need to address this. Issue a statement." Eli bristled. "I don't answer to a mob," he said, his pride refusing to let him bend. June sighed heavily, and for a moment, the distance between them felt more than physical. "This isn't about pride, Dad. It's about survival." The next morning, Eli found a package on his doorstep. Inside was a mock eviction notice stamped in red ink with the words "Nature's Justice" and a dead crow. The message was clear: leave or face worse. That night, Eli sat alone in the kitchen, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold in his hands. The farm was eerily quiet, save for the distant murmur of protesters. He thought of Margaret, his late wife, and how she'd always found a way to calm his stubborn heart. "What would you do, Maggie?" he whispered to the empty room. The farm wasn't just his legacy. It was hers too. She had fought alongside him to make it thrive, even during the hardest years. Letting it go now felt like betraying her memory. But how could he fight an enemy he couldn't see? A faceless crowd united by half-truths and lies. As the hours stretched into dawn, Eli felt the first twinge of doubt. What if they were right? What if his methods, his life's work, were flawed? He shook the thought away, but the seed had been planted. At sunrise, Eli stepped outside to check on his livestock. The first thing he noticed was the silence. The usual sounds of clucking hens and mooing cows were gone. His heart sank as he found several animals lying lifeless in the pasture. A hastily spray-painted message on the barn wall read, "Nature strikes back." June arrived later that morning, her city heels sinking into the mud as she rushed to her father's side. "This has gone too far," she said, her voice shaking. For the first time, Eli saw fear in her eyes, not for her career, but for him. They're trying to scare me off, Eli said, his jaw set. But this land isn't just dirt to me. It's everything. He met June's gaze. I won't leave. Not for them. Not for anyone. By the end of the week, the protesters had doubled in number. News vans began showing up, eager to capture the spectacle. Rebecca Chase returned to the farm, her notebook in hand, determined to tell the other side of the story. The truth will come out, Eli, she promised. But the protesters grew bolder. They began marching closer to the farmhouse, shouting Eli's name with venom. One night, rocks shattered a window in the living room, the glass scattering like jagged stars across the floor. Despite everything, Eli refused to leave his land. His resolve hardened. Through the cracks in his spirit grew deeper. He stood on his porch again, watching the protesters, and whispered, if they want to fight, they'll get one. But I won't be the one to break. Eli Turner's childhood was a symphony of the land. He learned to plow the fields at the age of 10, his father's hands guiding him on the wooden handles of the till. This soil is more than dirt, son, his father used to say, his voice steady and firm. It's life. Treat it right, and it'll take care of you. The Turner family farm wasn't just a livelihood. It was a sacred inheritance. Each season told its own story. The aching stillness of winter, the tender promise of spring, the rush of summer's bounty, and autumn's quiet retreat. Eli's world revolved around these rhythms, leaving little room for anything else. When Eli turned 16, a late summer drought nearly destroyed the family's crop. He watched his father dig trenches late into the night, trying to save what he could. Resilience, Eli, his father had said, wiping sweat from his brow. That's what keeps this farm alive. Those words became a cornerstone of Eli's identity. Long after his father passed, Eli carried on the lessons learned in the fields, his connection to the land growing deeper with each passing year. Margaret came into Eli's life like a spring rain, gentle but transformative. They met at a county fair, her laughter cutting through the noise of the crowd like music. A schoolteacher from a nearby town, Margaret saw something in Eli that others often missed: his quiet strength, his unshakable devotion to the farm. Their courtship was a whirlwind, filled with picnics under sprawling oak trees and shared dreams of a life built on hard work and love. Margaret wasn't afraid to roll up her sleeves, spending weekends helping Eli repair fences and plant seeds. The farm became their shared canvas. Margaret's touch was everywhere, from the flower beds she tended by the house to the hand-stitched curtains in the kitchen. Together, they weathered their share of storms, both literal and figurative, always emerging stronger. When June was born, Margaret insisted on giving her a name that symbolizes growth and renewal. She'll be our summer child, Margaret had said, her voice filled with hope. The farm became a playground for June, her laughter mingling with the calls of the barn swallows. As June grew older, her connection to the farm became more complicated. She adored her father and admired his dedication, but she also longed for the wider world beyond the farm's boundaries. By the time she was a teenager, her ambitions were clear. She wanted to make a difference, but on her own terms. Eli struggled to understand her need to leave. "This farm is in your blood, June," he would say, but she only smiled and replied, "So is your stubbornness, Dad." She left for college in the city, pursuing a degree in environmental science. Margaret's passing during June's second year at college created a chasm in their family. Eli buried his grief in the fields, while June threw herself into her studies, searching for answers that might prevent others from experiencing the same loss. Despite the distance, June never stopped caring for her father. She visited as often as she could, often arriving with ideas about how to improve the farm's practices. But their conversations often ended in frustration. Eli too set in his ways to accept her city ideas. After years of trial and error, Eli developed a hybrid farming technique that combined his father's old-world wisdom with modern sustainability practices. He introduced crop rotation and cover crops to restore nutrients to the soil, alongside carefully calculated irrigation systems to conserve water. "The soil isn't dead, June," Eli explained during one of her visits. "It just needs time to heal." His methods began to bear fruit with higher yields and healthier plants, but not everyone in the community shared his enthusiasm. The local farming community was deeply rooted in tradition, and many saw Eli's changes as a betrayal of their way of life. "We've been doing just fine for decades," one neighbor scoffed at a meeting. "Why mess with what works?" Eli felt the sting of their words, but pressed on. "It's not about what works now," he argued. "It's about what'll work for the next generation." The divide among the farmers grew, some supporting Eli's vision, while others dismissed him as an idealist. The local farmers' meeting was held in the town hall, its walls lined with faded photographs of past harvests. Eli stood near the back, arms crossed, as the discussion turned to new government subsidies for traditional farming practices. "Why should we change?" one farmer argued. "The government's paying us to keep things as they are." Eli couldn't stay silent. "Because it's not sustainable," he said, his voice cutting through the room. "What good is a subsidy if the land is too depleted to grow anything in 10 years? The room erupted in murmurs, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads. A senior farmer named Russ stood and pointed a finger at Eli. "Not all of us can afford to gamble on your experiments, Turner. You're risking everything for a dream." Eli's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. "It's not a dream," he replied firmly. "It's a plan, and it's working." Despite his confidence, he left the meeting feeling more isolated than ever, the weight of his choices pressing heavily on his shoulders. The tension among the farmers spilled over into the community. Eli noticed fewer neighbors waving as he passed by on his tractor, and even the local diner seemed colder. Some openly accused him of putting the town's economy at risk with his radical ideas. At home, Eli confided in June during a phone call. "They don't see what I see," he said, his voice weary. "They're clinging to the past while the future's slipping away." June tried to encourage him, but he could hear the doubt in her voice. Meanwhile, June faced her own challenges in the city. Colleagues questioned her loyalty to her environmental values, given her ties to a farmer accused of harming the planet. She began to wonder if she could ever reconcile her two worlds. Despite the growing rift, Eli remained steadfast. "This land is my life," he told himself one evening as he walked the fields. "And I'll fight for it, no matter what it takes." The trouble began with a single tweet, a blurry photo of Eli's farm, accompanied by the caption, "Local farmer caught destroying the environment in the name of profit," spread like wildfire. The account belonged to a small activist group, but within hours, the post gained traction with thousands of likes and retweets. The image was misleading. It showed a barren patch of soil where Eli had recently planted cover crops, a method to rejuvenate the land. Yet, without context, it looked like a wasteland. The caption weaponized the photo, painting Eli as an enemy of the planet. News outlets picked up the story, embellishing the narrative to fit their headlines. "Farmer accused of unsustainable practices," read one article. "Is tradition killing the earth?" asked another. Eli had no idea the storm was brewing until a neighbor sent him a link. Eli dismissed the post initially, assuming the truth would prevail. "Anyone who knows me knows better," he told June over the phone. But the internet wasn't interested in nuance, and the backlash quickly spiraled out of control. June urged Eli to respond. "You need to set the record straight, Dad," she said. "Post a video explaining your methods. Show them what you're actually doing." Eli shook his head, his pride flaring. "I don't owe anyone an explanation." Her frustration was palpable. "This isn't just about you, Dad. It's about the farm. If people believe these lies, they'll come for you." Eli refused to budge. Years of hard work had taught him that actions spoke louder than words. "Let them come," he said stubbornly. "The truth will stand on its own." But the truth wasn't enough for an audience hungry for outrage. Comments on the tweet ranged from calls for Eli's arrest to demands for a boycott of his farm. June's pleas fell on deaf ears, and Eli's silence only fueled the narrative against him. "Silence is guilt," read one particularly harsh comment. Others were crueler, attacking not just Eli but his family. June began to screen her father's calls, afraid of the toll the vitriol was taking on him. The backlash leaped from the digital world into Eli's mailbox. Anonymous letters began to arrive, each one more menacing than the last. "We're watching you," read one. Another warned, "You won't get away with this." One afternoon, a package appeared on Eli's porch. Inside was a fake eviction notice stamped with the words "environmental violation." Beneath it was a handwritten note: "Leave, or we'll make you leave." Eli clenched his fists, anger and fear warring within him. Eli reported the threats to the sheriff, but there wasn't much they could do. "We'll keep an eye out," the deputy said, but the look in his eyes suggested he wasn't optimistic. Eli felt alone, the land he'd spent his life protecting now feeling like a battleground. June begged him to consider taking a break. "Come stay with me in the city, just for a while," she suggested. But Eli refused. "This is my home," he said firmly. "I won't be chased off my own land." The first protester arrived on a Monday morning, a lone figure with a sign that read, "Stop killing the earth." By lunchtime, a dozen more had joined, chanting slogans and blocking the entrance to the farm. Eli tried to reason with them, stepping outside to explain his methods. "I'm not harming the land," he said, his voice steady but strained. "I'm healing it." His words fell on deaf ears. The crowd's leader, a young activist named Carrie, shouted back, "Then why won't you prove it? Why are you hiding?" The protest gained media attention, drawing even more activists to the farm. Local businesses began to distance themselves from Eli, refusing to buy his produce for fear of being associated with the controversy. Even longtime friends avoided him. At the diner, where Eli had eaten breakfast every morning for decades, the waitress handed him his check without making eye contact. The isolation was suffocating, but Eli refused to show weakness. Late one evening, Eli sat at his kitchen table, his laptop glowing dimly in the darkened room. He hesitated before clicking on a link June had sent him. "You need to see this, Dad," her message had said. The video opened with a smirking influencer addressing their audience. "Today, we're talking about the farmer who's single-handedly ruining our planet," the influencer said, their tone dripping with mockery. Clips of the protesters and the viral tweet flashed on the screen. The words stung like a slap. "This farmer is destroying the planet." Eli watched in silence as the influencer tore apart everything he'd worked for, twisting the truth into a weapon. The video had millions of views and thousands of comments, most of them condemning Eli. As the screen went dark, Eli sat motionless, the weight of the world pressing down on him. For the first time, he felt truly defeated. The farm had always been his sanctuary, but now it felt like a prison. "What have I done to deserve this?" he whispered into the empty room. The following morning, Eli heard a knock on his door. Standing there was Mabel Grayson, his elderly neighbor, clutching a basket of muffins. "I figured you could use some company," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. Mabel was more than a neighbor. She was the town's unofficial historian, a retired teacher with a sharp wit. She had lived in the area her entire life. Sitting at Eli's kitchen table, she listened as he recounted the events of the past few weeks, nodding silently. When Eli finished, Mabel leaned back in her chair, her eyes blazing. "This town has forgotten its roots," she said. "People like you are the backbone of this community, and they need a reminder of that." She began to tell stories of the land's history, recounting how Eli's family had nurtured it for generations. "Your father used to say that the soil remembers. It remembers every drop of sweat, every act of care. Don't let these people tarnish that legacy." Inspired by Mabel's determination, Eli found a small flicker of hope. She promised to rally support among the older members of the community, those who still valued the land and its stewards. Meanwhile, Rebecca Chase, a journalist from a regional news outlet, stumbled across the protest while researching a story on sustainable farming. The scene unsettled her. The signs, the chants, the anger. It felt too one-sided. Rebecca's curiosity deepened when she overheard a protester admit they didn't know much about Eli's farming practices. "We're just following orders," they said. Who was giving those orders, Rebecca wondered. She decided to contact Eli. After several unanswered calls, she showed up unannounced at the farm. Eli greeted her with suspicion, but Rebecca quickly disarmed him with her honesty. "I'm not here to attack you," she said. "I want to hear your side of the story. Over coffee, Eli reluctantly shared his methods and his philosophy about the land. Rebecca was struck by his passion and the care he poured into every decision. "You're not the man they're painting you as," she said, her voice firm. Rebecca asked permission to document his story. "If the world's going to judge you, they should at least have the truth," she said. Eli hesitated, but the desperation in her eyes mirrored his own. "Fine," he said, "but I'm not holding back." A few days later, June arrived at the farm, her face a mixture of guilt and determination. She had taken time off from her nonprofit job in the city, but the weight of the controversy followed her. "I'm here to help," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. Eli welcomed her with open arms, but tension lingered. Over dinner, they argued about his refusal to address the backlash earlier. "This wouldn't have gotten so bad if you just listened to me," June said. "I was trying to protect you." Eli fired back, his voice tinged with frustration. "Protect me? By abandoning everything we stand for?" Their words cut deep, but both knew the anger stemmed from love. After a tense silence, June softened. "I'm scared, Dad," she admitted. "For you, for the farm, for us." June spent the next few days helping Eli with chores, rediscovering the rhythms of farm life. Though she still felt torn between her urban ideals and her rural roots, being back on the land stirred something in her, a connection she thought she'd lost. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, June whispered, "I don't know if I can fix this, but I won't leave you to face it alone." Eli placed a hand on hers, his gratitude unspoken but deeply felt. Rebecca's investigation into the backlash began to reveal troubling details. Many of the protesters weren't locals. They had been bussed in from neighboring towns. She also discovered that the original tweet came from an account linked to a corporate lobbying group. "This isn't just a protest," Rebecca told Eli during one of their interviews. "Someone's orchestrating this. They're targeting you for a reason." Eli frowned, the pieces beginning to fall into place. "But why? I'm just a farmer." Rebecca dug deeper, finding connections between the lobbying group and a large agribusiness corporation with a vested interest in discrediting sustainable farming practices. "Your methods challenge their bottom line," she explained. "If people see you succeed, it threatens their entire model." Eli felt a surge of anger and resolve. "So this isn't just about me," he said. "It's about silencing anyone who wants to do things differently." Rebecca nodded, her determination mirroring his own. "We need to expose them," she said. Eli stood at the edge of his property, staring at the poison water trough that had killed 3 of his prize cattle. Their lifeless forms were a devastating reminder that the attacks had escalated. Later that day, Rebecca arrived with a grim expression. She handed Eli a folder of documents she had uncovered. "Tom Wilkes," she said softly. "He's the one who tipped off the activists." The words hit Eli like a punch to the gut. Tom had been his neighbor for over 20 years, a man Eli trusted implicitly. They'd shared equipment, advice, even meals during lean seasons. Unable to believe it, Eli drove to Tom's farm. The confrontation was raw and unfiltered. "Why, Tom?" Eli demanded, his voice cracking. "After everything we've been through?" Tom's face was etched with guilt, but also defiance. "They made me an offer, Eli. Money to tide me over. My farm's barely scraping by, and you were doing fine. I had to think of my family." Eli's rage boiled over. "Fine? You think this is fine?" he shouted, motioning toward his truck where the poisoned cattle still lay. "You sold me out for money, Tom. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed everything we stand for." Tom tried to explain, but Eli stormed off, his trust in the man shattered. Back at his own farm, he found June waiting on the porch. She took one look at his face and knew something terrible had happened. Over dinner, Eli told her everything. The betrayal, the poisoned livestock, and the growing suspicion that something larger was at play. June listened intently, her mind racing. That night, she began researching the financial records of the activist groups protesting Eli. Using contacts from her nonprofit job, she discovered strange donations from shell companies with ties to agribusiness conglomerates. June shared her findings with Rebecca the next morning. "This isn't grassroots," she said. "It's coordinated. Someone is funding these groups to take down sustainable farmers like Dad. The tension in the family reached a breaking point when Eli accused June of not being fully committed to his fight. "You're halfway out the door, June." "Always have been," he said bitterly. June fired back, her voice trembling with frustration. "I've spent my life trying to bridge these worlds, Dad. I care about this farm, but I also care about the bigger picture. Why can't you see that?" The argument left both of them emotionally drained. Rebecca, witnessing the exchange, decided to step in. "You're both fighting for the same thing," she said. "Don't let them tear you apart." Eli retreated to the barn, where he spent hours repairing a broken plow. The physical labor soothed his anger, but the weight of betrayal lingered. June, meanwhile, threw herself into her research, determined to uncover the truth behind the attacks. Despite their differences, she was unwilling to let her father face this alone. Rebecca proposed organizing a town hall meeting to give Eli a platform to share his side of the story. At first, Eli resisted. "I'm a farmer, not a public speaker," he said. "What good will it do?" But Rebecca and June pushed back. "If you don't speak, they'll keep controlling the narrative," Rebecca argued. "This is your chance to show people who you really are." Reluctantly, Eli agreed. Over the next few days, Rebecca helped him prepare. They practiced his speech in the barn, each word carefully chosen to convey his passion and honesty. Meanwhile, Rebecca and June worked behind the scenes to gather evidence exposing the corporate ties to the activist groups. They planned to unveil the truth at the town hall, hoping to sway public opinion. The community center buzzed with tension as Eli stepped onto the makeshift stage. The room was packed with neighbors, journalists, and protesters, their faces a mix of curiosity, anger, and skepticism. Eli adjusted the microphone, his hands trembling. For a moment, he froze, his mind blank. Then he caught sight of June and Rebecca at the back of the room, their silent encouragement grounding him. "I'm not a perfect man," Eli began, his voice steadying, "but I've spent my life working this land. Not for profit alone, but for what it means to my family, my community, and the future." He shared stories of his father teaching him to farm, of the droughts and floods they had endured, and of the innovations he had embraced to heal the soil. "This isn't just my farm," he said. "It's our shared legacy." By the time Eli finished, parts of the crowd had softened. A few people clapped hesitantly, while others muttered to themselves. Rebecca discreetly recorded the speech, knowing its authenticity would resonate online. Just as the atmosphere began to shift, a group of protesters stormed to the front, waving signs and shouting over Eli. "Lies! Exploiter! You're destroying the planet!" one screamed. The crowd erupted into chaos. Supporters of Eli shouted back at the protesters, and the shouting quickly escalated to shoving. Police officers stationed outside rushed in to restore order. Rebecca stood on a chair, her camera capturing every second. She focused on the ringleader, a woman with a bullhorn shouting accusations that were increasingly incoherent. Eli tried to intervene, pleading for calm. "This isn't the way," he said, but his words were drowned out by the cacophony. June pulled him back as tempers flared dangerously close to violence. The disruption ended with the protesters being escorted out, but the damage was done. The tension in the room remained thick, and many attendees left, shaking their heads in frustration. That night, Rebecca worked tirelessly to edit and upload the footage of Eli's speech and the protesters' outburst. Her accompanying article laid out the facts: Eli's sustainable practices, the false accusations, and the orchestrated nature of the attacks. Within hours, the post began to gain traction. Comments flooded in, many expressing outrage at the treatment Eli had endured. "This is what's wrong with activism today," one person wrote. "No one listens to the full story." Online influencers sympathetic to Eli's cause shared the video, and soon it went viral. The tide of public opinion began to shift as more people learned about the truth behind his methods and the baselessness of the accusations. Eli, exhausted from the town hall, found a moment of solace as Rebecca showed him the article's growing reach. "People are finally hearing your side," she said, smiling. But June remained uneasy. "This isn't over," she warned. They won't back down just because we're gaining ground. We need to dig deeper. Determined to follow her instincts, June continued to investigate the activist leader. Late one night, she uncovered a suspicious series of payments from a shell company to the protest group's account. The shell company was linked to Agrivist, a powerful agribusiness corporation notorious for sabotaging small farmers who opposed industrial practices. The revelation confirmed June's suspicions. The protests weren't organic. They were a smear campaign. Meanwhile, Eli tried to rebuild trust with his neighbors. Some were willing to listen, but others remained wary, too influenced by the protests and online outrage to change their minds. Late one evening, as Eli finished feeding the remaining livestock, he smelled smoke. Rushing outside, he froze in horror. His barn was engulfed in flames, the fire roaring like a living beast against the night sky. Dropping to his knees, Eli watched helplessly as everything he had fought to protect burned. The morning after the fire, Rebecca sifted through her notes in Eli's kitchen, her laptop open to dozens of tabs. "It's bigger than just Agrivist," she muttered. "There's another layer here." June leaned over her shoulder, her legal mind clicking into gear as Rebecca pointed to connections between Agrivist and Greencore, a powerful agribusiness conglomerate with a history of silencing small farmers. "Greencore," June said grimly. "They're not just competitors, they're predators." Eli's methods threaten their bottom line because they prove chemical-heavy farming isn't the only way. The two women began cross-referencing financial records, news articles, and leaked documents. Patterns emerged: donations to activist groups, coordinated social media campaigns, and payments to local influencers who spread misinformation about Eli. Late that evening, they found their smoking gun: a confidential memo from Greencore outlining a strategy to discredit sustainable farmers who didn't align with their business model. Eli's name was on the list. When Rebecca and June presented their findings to Eli, his reaction was a mix of fury and fear. "They burned my barn, poisoned my cattle," he said, his voice trembling. "What else are they capable of?" Rebecca urged him to go public with the conspiracy. "If you stay silent, they win," she argued. But Eli hesitated, the weight of his responsibility to the farm and his family pressing heavily on him. "I'm not a fighter," Eli admitted. "I'm just a farmer trying to do right by the land. Going up against a giant like Greencore could ruin me." June, now fully aligned with her father's cause, countered his doubts with determination. "If you don't fight, Dad, who will? This isn't just about our farm. It's about every farmer they've bullied into silence." Eli retreated to his workshop, wrestling with his decision. The charred remains of his barn were visible through the window, a stark reminder of what was at stake. Rebecca dug deeper into Greencore's operations, uncovering a network of misinformation campaigns targeting farmers across the country. "This isn't an isolated incident," she told June. "They've done this before." June reached out to a colleague in environmental law, asking for advice on drafting a case against Greencore. "It's a long shot," her colleague warned, "but if you have solid evidence, it could work." Eli, finally convinced of the necessity of action, began contacting other farmers who had been targeted by Greencore. Many were hesitant to speak out, fearing retaliation, but a few agreed to share their stories anonymously. With Rebecca's help, Eli filmed a video explaining his sustainable methods and exposing Greencore's tactics. It was raw and emotional, showing a man determined to defend his way of life despite overwhelming odds. The video, released alongside Rebecca's investigative article, went viral. Support poured in from across the country, but so did threats, as Greencore ramped up its efforts to silence Eli. One evening, a courier delivered an envelope to Eli's doorstep. Inside was a subpoena. Greencore was suing him for defamation, claiming his accusations were false and damaging to their reputation. "This is their next move," June said, her face pale. "They're trying to bury us in legal fees and scare us into backing down." Eli's resolve faltered. "I'm just a farmer," he repeated. "How am I supposed to fight a corporation with unlimited resources?" But June and Rebecca refused to let him quit. "We'll fight this together," Rebecca said firmly. "The truth is on our side, and the world is watching now. Greencore can't hide forever." Eli sat stiffly in the courtroom, his calloused hands gripping the table. The grandeur of the room felt suffocating, a world away from the open fields he loved. Beside him, June flipped through legal documents with calm precision, her professional demeanor masking the stakes they both knew were life-altering. The opposing counsel, representing Green Corps, began with a venomous opening statement. They painted Eli as a reckless farmer spreading lies to cover his incompetence. Every accusation felt like a hammer blow to his spirit. June rose to deliver their defense, her voice steady and deliberate. She spoke of Eli's decades of service to the land and community, his innovative farming practices, and the baseless nature of Green Corps' lawsuit. Her words cut through the tension, sparking murmurs among the onlookers. The trial's first witness, a Green Corps executive, delivered rehearsed answers under cross-examination. June's probing questions, however, began to expose cracks in their narrative, suggesting ulterior motives behind their aggressive stance. Eli's anxiety mounted as the trial progressed, but Rebecca, seated a few rows back, gave him a reassuring nod. She whispered to herself, "Hold on, Eli. The truth will come out." The turning point came when Mabel Grayson took the stand. The frail, elderly woman walked with purpose, her cane tapping against the courtroom floor like a drumbeat of resolve. Mabel began her testimony with a soft but unwavering voice, recounting the history of the community and Eli's pivotal role in preserving its heart. "This isn't just about a farm," she said, her gaze piercing the jury. "It's about a legacy, a way of life that values care and stewardship over greed." Her account of Eli mentoring young farmers, sharing his methods, and reviving barren fields brought tears to some in the audience. Even the judge seemed moved by her words. Green Corps' lawyer attempted to discredit Mabel's testimony, but her quick wit and undeniable authenticity left them floundering. The courtroom erupted in applause as she stepped down, a defiant smile on her face. Eli felt a flicker of hope for the first time. His neighbors, many of whom had been swayed by Green Corps' propaganda, began exchanging looks of guilt and solidarity. Rebecca's moment arrived when June called her as a witness. Armed with evidence she had painstakingly gathered, Rebecca laid out the web of deception linking Green Corps to activist groups. "This isn't about environmentalism," Rebecca said, projecting her voice across the courtroom. "This is about corporate greed. Green Corps orchestrated a campaign to destroy a farmer who threatened their monopoly on agriculture." She presented emails between Green Corps executives and protest organizers, proving that the protests were funded and directed to create a false narrative. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the evidence was displayed on screens. The climax came with an email from a Green Corps VP that explicitly stated, "Make sure Eli James is silenced. His methods are bad for business." The judge ordered a recess as the courtroom descended into chaos. During the break, Eli's neighbors approached him, offering apologies and pledging their support. "We were wrong," one said, gripping his shoulder. "We see it now. You were trying to save us all." As the trial resumed, it became clear that Green Corps' case was unraveling. Their lawyers scrambled to contain the damage, but the public perception had shifted decisively in Eli's favor. The final blow came when Green Corps abruptly withdrew their lawsuit, citing irreconcilable differences in evidence. It was a transparent attempt to avoid further humiliation, but to Eli, it felt like vindication. The courtroom erupted in cheers as the judge declared the case dismissed. Eli hugged June tightly, his pride in her palpable. "You did it, kiddo," he whispered. "We did it." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Eli, June, and Rebecca. Eli, still overwhelmed, managed a few heartfelt words. "This fight wasn't just for me. It was for every farmer who's been silenced by greed." The morning after the trial, June sits at her desk, poring over Rebecca's latest findings. A name appears repeatedly in the documents: Dr. Amanda Pierce. The name stops June cold, sparking a flood of memories. Dr. Amanda Pierce had been June's mentor during her college years, an accomplished environmental scientist with radical views on activism. Their relationship soured after a bitter disagreement over ethical boundaries in advocacy work. Rebecca, sensing the tension in June, presses her for answers. I know her, June admits, her voice shaking. She's the last person I'd expect, but it makes too much sense now. As they dig deeper, they uncover that Amanda had spearheaded the smear campaign against Eli. Emails reveal Amanda's personal resentment toward June and Eli, seeing their work as a betrayal of true environmentalism. Rebecca insists on confronting Amanda, but June hesitates. This is personal, she says. She won't just admit to it. I need to talk to her myself. June arranges a meeting with Amanda at a local cafe, choosing a neutral ground to avoid escalation. As Amanda enters, her confident stride and cold gaze send a chill down June's spine. The conversation begins civilly, but tension builds as June lays out the evidence. Amanda deflects, claiming her actions were motivated by protecting the environment, not personal grievances. You're lying, June snaps, her voice trembling with controlled anger. This wasn't about the land. This was about me and my father. Why? Amanda's facade cracks. She recounts how she felt abandoned and overshadowed by June's rise to prominence, while her own career crumbled. Her bitterness toward Eli stems from his embodiment of values Amanda felt the world no longer respected. You think you're saving the planet, June fires back, but all you've done is hurt the very people who are trying to make a difference. Amanda's silence speaks volumes. Amanda refuses to apologize or back down, so June brings her to the farm, hoping the place might stir some humanity in her old mentor. Eli waits on the porch, his expression a mix of curiosity and exhaustion. As Amanda surveys the land, Eli recounts his struggles, his voice steady but laced with pain. This farm isn't perfect, he says, but it's home, and I'll protect it not just for my family, but for this community. Amanda attempts to justify her actions, claiming Eli's methods were too small-scale to matter. But Eli's quiet conviction begins to unravel her defenses. It's not about scale, he says. It's about doing what's right, no matter the odds. The conversation grows heated as June demands Amanda admit the truth. Rebecca arrives with more evidence, cornering Amanda. With no way out, Amanda finally breaks. I didn't think it would go this far, Amanda whispers, tears welling up. I just wanted people to listen to me, to the cause. But I lost control. Eli, despite the turmoil Amanda caused, makes a surprising choice. We could destroy you for what you've done, he says. But what would that change? I'm tired of fighting hate with hate. Amanda is stunned by Eli's words. He speaks about resilience, forgiveness, and the power of moving forward. You've done enough damage, he says, but this doesn't have to be where it ends for you. In a powerful moment, Eli extends a hand to Amanda. Though hesitant, she takes it, breaking down in tears. I don't deserve this, she murmurs. The morning sun casts a golden glow over Turner Farm, where Eli stands surveying the land that had weathered so much. The barn, once a heap of ashes, is now being rebuilt with the help of neighbors who had rallied to his side. Mabel Grayson organizes volunteers, her sharp voice cutting through the chatter. Even neighbors who had doubted Eli now swing hammers and haul wood, their actions speaking louder than words of apology. June works alongside them, her city clothes swapped for work boots and gloves. She teases Eli about his stubbornness, and for the first time in months, he chuckles. The community potluck afterward feels like a celebration. Children play among the fields, and older folks swap stories about Eli's father, weaving a shared narrative of resilience. Eli sits quietly at the edge of the gathering, sipping sweet tea, grateful for the sight of unity after so much division. Back in the city, June finds new purpose in her advocacy work, blending the lessons learned from her father with her legal expertise. She works tirelessly to connect urban policymakers with rural farmers. June's initiatives include educational workshops on sustainable farming and urban-rural partnerships, earning her praise from both sides of the divide. We need to listen to each other, she says at a conference, because the land connects us all. Her relationship with Eli deepens as they find common ground. Weekly phone calls and weekend visits to the farm become the new normal, bridging the distance that once separated them. Eli sends June a surprise package, a framed photo of her as a child, standing beside her mother in the garden. "Remember where you come from," the note reads. The act softens June, and she starts incorporating more of her family's values into her presentations, earning respect for her authenticity and passion. Rebecca's final article on Eli's journey and the Green Corps conspiracy breaks records online. Titled "The Farmer Who Fought Back," it chronicles Eli's perseverance and the deeper implications of corporate interference in sustainable farming. The story ignites widespread outrage against Green Corps, leading to multiple investigations and the eventual resignation of several executives. Lawsuits against the corporation pile up as other farmers come forward with similar stories. Eli becomes a reluctant symbol of hope for struggling farmers, receiving letters and emails from across the country. "You gave us courage," one young farmer writes. "If you can stand up, so can we." Rebecca continues her work, now a respected investigative journalist, but her bond with the Turner family remains strong. She visits the farm often, finding solace in its quiet beauty. During one visit, Rebecca hands Eli a framed copy of her article. "This is your story," she says, "but it's also the story of everyone who's ever fought for what they love." One crisp autumn morning, Eli walks to the edge of his property, holding a young sapling in his weathered hands. It's a rare heritage apple tree, one his wife, Margaret, had always wanted to plant. June joins him, holding a small plaque engraved with Margaret's name and the words, "Her roots are in this soil." Together, they dig a hole, placing the tree gently into the earth. As they pack the soil around the roots, Eli speaks softly, almost to himself. "This is for her, and for all of us. The storms will come, but we'll always grow back." The tree stands tall, a symbol of renewal and hope. Neighbors arrive to watch, sharing in the quiet but profound moment, their unity unshaken by past divisions.